Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. We call it in college sports, in college football, talking season. And why it's called talking season is because right now we have all these media days going on, all sorts of stuff going on, and of course, all sorts of things being said, I should say. And all the conferences are basically underway. A few weeks ago, we had the Big 12. Last week was the SEC. And on Tuesday, both the ACC and the Big 10 started their media days. And when I tell you that even though the SEC wasn't on stage, they were the center of conversation, yeah, there were a lot of people with a lot to say about the state of SEC football that do not play or coach or live in SEC country. So two different coaches on Tuesday afternoon called out the SEC and basically said, they ain't as good as they make themselves out to be. Let's get into each of them. First of all, ACC Media Days. Rhett Lashley, he is the head coach at SMU. Remember, SMU got the final at-large bid last year into the first-ever 12-team college football playoff over Alabama, among others. Was talking about the SEC, was talking about a few different things. Here is what he had to say about the SEC. Quote, he said, the SEC has had the same 6 schools win the championship since 1964. Not a single one has been different since 1964. That's top heavy to me. That's not depth. So basically, Rhett Lashley saying everybody talks about SEC depth. In the last 61 years, we have had 6 different teams win the SEC. By the way, I looked it up. I could not believe that stat. It is true. Since 1964, only Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, LSU, Auburn have won the SEC. So I want to get to that quote in a minute. But right when I was done swallowing and digesting what Rhett Lashley had to say, then I turned on Big Ten Media Day, and Curt Signetti, never afraid to share his opinion. Remember, Indiana made the college football playoff last year. And remember, Indiana was a very controversial selection. They had canceled a game against Louisville in the out-of-conference. They played no one of note in the out-of-conference, and so instead played 3 cupcakes into the Big Ten schedule where they did play 9 games. The SEC only plays 8 league games. And Signetti asked about his scheduling philosophy, which, by the way, included another canceled game this year against Virginia. Signetti was asked about it. Here is what he had to say. Quote, where we get our scheduling philosophy from? We figured we'd adopt an SEC scheduling philosophy. So listen, we're going to get into each of those quotes, but to me, what this speaks to is the SEC still atop the sport of college football? Yeah, I actually kind of think they sort of are, but at the same time, nobody's afraid of them, and nobody wants to hear any sort of propaganda. So let's go ahead and dive into each of those quotes, and I'll try to be quick. First of all, I'll say this. The Lashley quote I just referenced, I found it very interesting. I don't really know that like it means all that much. Again, 6 teams in the last 61 years have won the SEC. He's saying it's not about depth. I didn't know depth was only about the team that won the league, right? I thought depth was team 3, team 5, team 7, team 10, team whatever. So I don't really know how much I even agree with that quote. I will say this about the Signetti quote, though, which is interesting. His insinuation basically being, hey, we figured we'd adopt an SEC scheduling philosophy, play nobody in the out-of-conference, but we play 9 league games. The SEC only plays 8. And so this, to me, is an important note, an important distinction where I think a lot of the frustration comes from. Signetti saying, wait a second now, you're telling us we didn't play anybody. Well, guess what? We played 9 power conference teams last year. That is the same as Texas, who got an at-large bid. Nobody complained about them getting in. 8 league games, plus they played Michigan. By the way, Indiana also played Michigan. Both teams beat Michigan. Signetti saying, we played 9 league games. That is the same number of power conference teams as Alabama, who we got in over. Alabama played 8 SEC games and 1 out-of-conference game at Wisconsin. Signetti saying, we played 9 power conference teams. That's the same as Ole Miss, who we got in over. Same as South Carolina, who we got in over. So stop whining about our schedule. look in the mirror, acknowledge that the SEC plays FCS teams, they play group of 5 teams late in the schedule, but they also only play 8 league games. And until everybody gets on a balanced schedule, I ain't going to sit here and apologize for what we're doing. Also, Signetti just kind of likes to talk that smack. I was thinking about this. Is there any coach in America that both the entire SEC and Ohio State kind of hate more than Signetti? Of course, Signetti with those comments last year about screw Ohio State, screw Purdue, screw this team, screw that team, whatever. Anyway, so those were the quotes. And this is what I kind of want to talk about from here. To me, I don't think it's really a conversation today about which league is the best, right? That gets settled on the field. But what I do think it is a conversation about is 2 different things. Is one, I think for the first time in a while, there is some genuine debate. I think there are reasons that you can argue against the SEC, but I think more than anything, these other conferences are sitting there saying, you've shoved your propaganda down our throats for 20 plus years. And for part of that time, it might have been true. We ain't buying it anymore. We ain't putting up with it anymore. And you got to acknowledge that we play pretty good football as well, okay? As far as the first part is concerned, I think it is important to note, like the SEC, listen, I think I try to be fair in this. I try to be balanced in this. You go back to last year, I argued that SMU should be in over Alabama based on the criteria that the committee had. I argued Indiana should be in. It's not pro or anti-SEC. It's what is the criteria? What is the argument? What is the reasoning? And last year, the committee said nothing that happens on championship weekend is going to impact the teams that are in. So SMU was in before they played Clemson in the ACC championship game, okay? But the bottom line is, what I do think is indisputable is things are going in the wrong direction for the SEC. We know that the last 2 years, the national champion has come out of the Big Ten. Michigan 2 seasons ago. Ohio State last year. Oh, by the way, the SEC hasn't even played for a national championship in each of the last 2 years. Michigan beat Washington. Of course, last year, Ohio State beat Notre Dame. It's worth noting, by the way, I went and looked at the national championship odds for this season. Of the top 6 teams, there's 3 in the Big Ten, 2 in the SEC. Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon in the Big Ten. In the SEC, it's Georgia and Texas, and Clemson is in that short conversation as well. So I just bring it up because the facts actually back up that at least at the top, the Big Ten has caught up. And I think to the point that both of these coaches have made, I don't think that this is the important part, I think. The benefit of the doubt doesn't just automatically go to the SEC anymore, right? Because I think for 10 or 15 years, for the bottom line is the benefit of the doubt did go to the SEC, and I think justifiably so. About 12, 13 years in a row, they won a national championship. You start with, I guess it wasn't 12 or 13, but it was about 8 or 9. You start with Florida against Ohio State in 2006. It goes through, sorry, producer Matt, but, Florida State beating Auburn in, 2013, 2014, somewhere like that. So, and by the way, even after that, Alabama won multiple national championships. LSU won a title. You go on and on down the list. I think the benefit of the doubt was deserved. I don't know that it is anymore. One, the results on the field say that the Big Ten has caught up at the top. 2, I do think it is worth noting that the SEC plays 1 fewer league game. And I don't want to get into the whole dynamics of the expanded college football playoff, but it seems as though the Big Ten is very much going to draw a line in the sand about their beliefs about expanding to 16 teams. It sounds like unless the SEC is willing to expand to 9 league games, they're not sitting here and rearranging the college football playoff for the SEC. Finally, let me say this is I do think it speaks to a broader thing that we've talked about on this show that I think everybody who loves college sports, cares about college sports, talks about college sports has to acknowledge. The SEC might still be the best top to bottom. I know Rhett Lashley had the depth conversation. I would argue it's still the deepest conference in college football. But the counter to that I would say is pretty straightforward, is that while it might still be the deepest, it does feel like the Big Ten has caught up. It does feel like the benefit of the doubt is gone. And it does feel like for the first time in 20 years that some of the dynamics in college football are favoring other teams in other conferences plus Notre Dame. Listen, we talked about this in the college football playoff last year. For 20 years, the SEC had a monopoly on not only the best talent, but retaining the best talent, right? And so you start to go back. Why was the SEC so dominant? One, an all-time great coach, but two, let's call a spade a spade. Most of the best high school football talent is located in the SEC footprint, in Florida, in Georgia, in Texas, in Louisiana. Well, back in the day when all of those guys would commit and then have to stay in a program because there was no such thing as the transfer portal, the SEC was great because they had more good players in their backyard. They had to stay. They didn't transfer. Now the sport has changed. You look across college football, it's crazy as we start our prep work, the amount of talent and how much it's spread out. And how much it's spread out, frankly, in a lot of cases to the Big Ten. Penn State, their best cornerback, former five-star A.J. Harris, began his career at Georgia. That's a dude that 10 years ago couldn't have left Georgia, wouldn't have left Georgia, wouldn't be at Penn State. Michigan, who's their best running back? Justice Haynes was the backup running back last year at Alabama. Now, I'm not saying I'm not saying he would have been like a star at Alabama, but what I am saying is if there's an injury, if somebody twists an ankle, whatever, that's the guy that's going in. Now he's not at Alabama. So the talent is more spread out. And then I think what's indisputable is, listen, I think some of the conversation about, well, now everybody can pay players. Yeah, I think that's a little bit hyperbolic and a little bit silly. But the counter to that is it's also sort of true as well. And not only is it true, but on top of that, the Big Ten schools in many ways are better positioned to raise crazy amounts of money. And I know we're going to this rev share conversation, but I understand that we're in theory going to put a cap on how much teams can spend. One, I don't believe that will be the case. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But two, I bring it up because the Big Ten schools have bigger alumni bases and frankly more money. And it's just a simple, to quote my buddy JJ Redick, it's a math equation, F-head. Why is that? It's because when Penn State has literally 3 times as many alums as Alabama does, living alums across the world, guess what happens? That's 3 times as many boosters in theory that are willing to pay to help in NIL. Michigan has a massive alumni base. Ohio State, Wisconsin, you go on and on down the list. As a matter of fact, just for fun, I went and looked it up. According to alumbase.com/blog/largest alumni associations, here are the top 10 largest alumni associations in the world. Penn State at close to 800,000 living alums. Indiana University, kind of surprisingly, at 775. Michigan at number 3. Ohio State at number 4. The first SEC school makes the list. That's the University of Texas. Then it's UC Berkeley. Then it's Michigan State. Then it's Texas A&M. Then it's Harvard and Stanford. Well, I bring that up. Not great at math, but I just listed off a bunch of schools. What was there? 6 Big Ten schools in there? Indiana, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State. I think that's 5. 2 in the SEC. And they're the 2 schools that we all agree spend the most money. Texas and Texas A&M. And so I just bring it up because, listen, the game has changed. The dynamics have changed. Money talks. And right now, the Big Ten, I think, is spending more money than just about anybody. Bryce Underwood is not the quarterback at Michigan if it isn't for money. He's played at LSU this year. Again, think about Ohio State, a $20 million roster last year, which we believe was the highest in college football. Now, it's not to say that teams in the SEC can't compete, specifically Texas and Texas A&M. Did you see where Texas A&M is going to spend $51 million between 24 and 25 in terms of their rosters? It's just to say that the dynamics have changed. And like I said, I don't think the SEC just gets the benefit of the doubt because they're the SEC anymore. I don't. And I certainly don't think they get the benefit of the doubt when they're playing one fewer league game. So this is going to be, I think it's an interesting conversation, but I think it's a broader conversation that we have to have because as we get into the season and as we get into college football playoff expansion conversations, it sounds like the Big Ten is drawing a line in the sand. If you're not going to add a league game, SEC, we don't want to hear your complaints. We don't want to hear your whining. And again, I think this is a metaphor for, I think a lot of people have kind of sucked it up and dealt with the propaganda. I don't think anybody's dealing with that propaganda anymore.